For thousands of years, human beings did one thing with almost instinctive conviction: continue. Empires fell, wars erased entire cities in days, epidemics crossed continents and killed 1 in 3 people. Parents buried children, children buried parents, and in the middle of all that, the absolute uncertainty of whether tomorrow existed, men and women kept bringing children into the world. Not because life was beautiful. Life was brutal and short and mostly painful, and they knew it. They continued anyway. Now, look at the present. For the first time in recorded history, entire societies have begun to lose the most basic impulse of any living system: to reproduce itself. We are not talking about one country in a temporary dip. South Korea, Japan, Italy, Germany, Spain, Canada, the richest, safest, most medically advanced societies ever constructed. The places where you are statistically least likely to die young, least likely to starve, least likely to be killed. The places where children survive, where medicine works, where the floor exists. The places where people have most decisively stopped continuing. That is not an economic problem. That is a verdict. And the most important question being asked right now, not in parliaments, not in policy papers, but quietly, privately, in the part of the mind that doesn't perform for anyone, is this: what exactly has the modern human being seen in life to begin hesitating before their own continuity? Because that question changes everything. It means the birth rate collapse is not a crisis of economics, it is a crisis of perception. A civilization looking at itself clearly, possibly for the first time, and not being sure it likes what it sees. Throughout history, life was brutal, but brutality alone never stopped reproduction because there was always something that made the suffering bearable. Not easier, but bearable. Religion that gave the suffering a shape and a purpose. Community that meant you were never carrying the weight alone. Family structures so tight that your existence was woven into something larger than yourself. A future that, however hard, felt like it was going somewhere. Contemporary human beings have lost almost all of these structures simultaneously. And when they disappear, what remains is something nobody prepared anyone for: direct contact with existence, unmediated, unframed, without the psychological infrastructure that every previous generation inherited automatically. Waking up, desiring, struggling, losing, aging, watching everything deteriorate, watching the people you love deteriorate, watching yourself deteriorate, without a story that explains why, without a community that holds you while it happens, without a God who promises it means something, just the thing itself. And perhaps that is why a growing part of the population can no longer look at a child without feeling, alongside the tenderness, an ethical weight that previous generations never had the framework to name. Because raising someone does not only mean creating happy moments, it means creating a consciousness that will feel fear, that will experience loss, that will lie awake with the knowledge of its own death, that will love people who will die, that will build things that will be destroyed, that will want things it cannot have and have things it cannot keep. You are not giving someone a life, you are introducing them to the full weight of being alive. And for the first time in history, enough people understand what that weight actually contains to hesitate before placing it on someone who cannot yet refuse it. David Benatar writes something almost impossible to honestly refute. Every birth introduces a being to suffering, not might, will. The suffering is not a risk of life, it is the structure of life. Physical pain, fear, loss, grief, the specific devastation of watching love end or watching love die. These come with the package for everyone without a single exception in the history of the species. For most of human history, humanity answered the question of whether it was worth it automatically without examining it, because the examination was not available. Today, for the first time, millions of people seem genuinely unable to answer with the same certainty. And perhaps the most disturbing phenomenon of this century is not technological, not political. Perhaps it is the moment when humanity began to suspect, in large enough numbers to show up in the data, that existence may not be the unambiguous gift they were always told it was. For almost all of human history, not having children was not a real choice for most people. It was a rare circumstance, usually a misfortune, sometimes a tragedy. Most people did not choose to have children. They simply had them the way they breathed, because the alternative was not structurally available. A woman without children carried social stigma so heavy it functioned as punishment. A man without descendants felt the failure in every interaction. Family was not sentiment, it was survival infrastructure. Children were labor, old age security, economic continuity, religious obligation, cultural transmission. In more traditional, rural, religiously structured societies, this remains largely true. Which is precisely why birth rates remain higher there. Not because those populations love life more, not because they have found meaning that modern people have lost, but because existence is still embedded in structures that make the question of whether to continue feel less like a choice and more like a given. In modern societies, something radical happened. The individual was extracted from the necessity of reproducing. Contraception separated sex from children. Economic independence separated women from the need for a provider. Welfare states separated old age from the need of biological heirs. Legal systems stopped requiring family as a social unit of survival. And for the first time, the question became genuinely answerable. The disappearance of obligation revealed true desire. And what true desire looks like across dozens of different countries with completely different cultures and histories is appearing in the statistics. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental and too deep to be reversed by cash incentives. Something that was called instinct was in large part compulsion. And when the compulsion was removed, the instinct did not hold on its own. This is the thing the pro-natalist conversation cannot say. Maybe the human desire for children was never as automatic, as universal, as biological as we needed to believe. Maybe what we called nature was mostly structure, and now that the structure is gone, we are seeing what was underneath it. The philosopher Philippe Aries observed that for most of history, childhood was not even idealized in the modern sense. Children were functional units of family continuity before they were emotional projects. Modernity changed this completely. Having children became an intimate decision, and intimate decisions are far more fragile than obligations because now each individual must answer alone questions that tradition once answered automatically. Why bring someone into the world? What exactly will you offer them? Are you sure they'll want what you're offering? Neither religion nor community nor custom answer these automatically anymore. And the silence where the answer used to be is exactly where the hesitation lives. Here is something people think and nobody says. When someone says they want a child, they are describing a feeling they anticipate having about a person who does not yet exist. They are describing the imagined feeling of being needed completely, the imagined pride, the imagined continuation of something, name, story, genes, beyond their own death, the imagined comfort of not dying alone, the imagined version of themselves that becomes through parenthood a person with weight and purpose. None of that is about the child. The child doesn't exist yet. You cannot love someone into existence. You can only love the idea of them, which is love for yourself, your imagined future, your terror of insignificance, your need to matter to someone who cannot yet choose to leave. Every birth in human history has been an act performed entirely by and for the living. And then the child arrives, and the child is not the feeling that was imagined. The child is a separate consciousness, with its own pain, its own needs, its own trajectory, one that will frequently diverge from and exceed and contradict everything the parent projected onto it. The parent wanted a feeling. They received a person. And sometimes those are the same thing. And sometimes the gap between what was imagined and what actually arrived is something nobody has the language or the permission to name. Most people don't want a child. They want the version of themselves that has a child. The difference shows up in the child, and the child carries it for life. There is an ethical principle so fundamental that it applies to every domain of modern life except one. You cannot make a major, irreversible decision on the behalf of another person without their consent. Medical decisions, financial obligations, legal commitments. We have built entire systems around this principle because we understand that the person affected by a decision is the only one with the standing to make it. Except birth. Birth is the only completely irreversible, total, life-defining decision ever made about a person. The decision that determines everything, precedes everything, cannot be undone, and it is made entirely without the person's knowledge, input, or agreement. The person cannot consent because the person does not yet exist. You are creating the entity and making the decision simultaneously, which means consent is not just absent, it is structurally impossible. Every single birth in human history has been, in the most precise sense, a non-consensual act. Not violent, not malicious, but non-consensual. And when you add to that the specific contents of what the person is being introduced to, suffering that is not a risk but a certainty, grief that is not avoidable but guaranteed, death that is not a possibility but the only fixed point on the entire trajectory, the question becomes genuinely, uncomfortably hard. If the person could have been asked, would they have said yes? We assume yes. We have to assume yes, because the assumption is load-bearing for everything. But we have no evidence for it. We only know that most people, once alive, choose to remain so, which is not consent to having been created. It is adaptation to a fait accompli. The person who keeps living is not endorsing the decision that brought them here.
They are simply making the best of something that was done to them before they could speak. No civilization sustains birth rates when the relationships that birth requires are structurally collapsing. This is not a moral judgment, it is arithmetic, and modern relationships are structurally unstable, not because modern people are worse than previous generations, but because the entire cultural architecture of how relationships form and end has been rebuilt around a logic that is fundamentally incompatible with what children require. Bauman named it precisely. Liquid modernity is a civilization of impossible fixation. People want love, but they want an emergency exit. They want depth, but without the risk that depth requires. They want intimacy, but without dependency, which is another way of saying they want something that does not exist, because intimacy without dependency is just proximity. Relationships now operate under a logic of consumption. While they produce satisfaction, they persist. When the satisfaction declines, when the relationship requires work, when the attraction becomes effort, when the person in front of you is harder than the person you imagined, exit is not just available, it is encouraged. Leaving is growth. Moving on is self-respect. A child is the complete negation of that logic. A child cannot be paused during a crisis, cannot be emotionally suspended when desire disappears, cannot be returned. A child is the one commitment in modern life that does not come with an emergency exit, and in a culture that has made the emergency exit not just acceptable but virtuous, the child has become something that feels less like fulfillment and more like a trap. And this fear did not emerge from nowhere. An enormous portion of the current generation grew up watching what the trap looked like when it closed. Destructive separations, emotionally absent parents, marriages sustained by obligation and resentment, two people in the same house performing a relationship neither of them was still in, the children absorbing everything that could not be said. Many people learned very early that family can be the source of the deepest damage a person will ever receive. They know what it feels like to grow up in a home where love was conditional or withheld or weaponized. They know in their bodies what it costs to be raised by people who were not ready, who stayed when they should have left, who left when they should have stayed. And the most honest thing Machado B. Assis ever wrote sits here like a stone. I had no children. I did not transmit to any creature the legacy of our misery. This is not nihilism. In many cases, it is the most considered, most loving thing a person can decide, a refusal to continue a cycle they can see clearly enough to name, a choice that took more honesty than the alternative. And here is the brutal contradiction that modernity has produced. We have never spoken so much about mental health, never understood so much about trauma, never had so much psychological awareness about how damage travels from parent to child to grandchild across generations, arriving in a body before that body has language to receive it. And perhaps precisely because of that awareness, a growing part of the population has begun to understand the full weight of what forming another human consciousness actually means. The question has stopped being merely biological, it has become ethical, and ethics is harder than biology. Every generation passes its unfinished damage to the next. The first generation that pauses and says, "Maybe I shouldn't," is called selfish. The children being born right now are showing us something the conversation refuses to incorporate. Childhood anxiety is rising sharply across every developed country. Depression in adolescence is at historic highs. Self-harm among teenage girls has increased in ways that the data describes as a crisis, and the public discourse treats as background noise. Eating disorders, attention disorders, social anxiety so severe it prevents basic functioning. These are not marginal statistics. They are the dominant trend in youth mental health across the wealthiest societies on Earth. This is not a parenting failure in the individual sense. These parents are, by measurable standards, more informed, more emotionally attentive, more therapeutically aware than any previous generation of parents. They read the research. They monitor their own behavior. They try in ways their parents never knew to try. The problem is the environment that children are being launched into, which operates like a psychological centrifuge. It spins faster than any child's sense of self can stabilize. Before they've formed an identity, the algorithm is engineering one for them. Before they've learned to sit with themselves, they're exposed to the continuous judgment of hundreds of peers at all times, every hour, every day, with no off switch and no escape. Jonathan Haidt documents this with enough data to make the conclusion inescapable. The smartphone-mediated childhood is producing measurably, dramatically worse psychological outcomes than every childhood that preceded it. Not slightly worse in specific metrics, comprehensively worse across nearly every measure of mental health in nearly every country where the data exists.
Modern parents are not raising children inside a community. They are managing damage inside an isolation unit against forces they cannot individually defeat, produced by systems that have no incentive to stop. And the people who are watching this, who haven't yet had children, who are standing at the edge of the decision, are updating accordingly. The question is no longer whether you can love a child enough. The question is whether you can protect a consciousness you create from an environment that has been specifically designed by people far more resourced than any parent to exploit the specific vulnerabilities that children carry. We built a world that is actively hostile to childhood and then asked why people are hesitating to create children. The 20th century produced genuine, measurable improvements in the material conditions of human life. Vaccines, antibiotics, agricultural systems that ended mass famine, medicine that extended the average lifespan by decades, legal and economic structures that gave women choices that were previously unavailable to them. If the old birth rate was simply about necessity and the absence of choice, removing the necessity and adding the choice should have preserved the birth rate as a genuine preference while eliminating the compelled portion. The birth rate collapsed instead, which means one of two things. Either the desire for children was never as strong as civilization needed it to appear, it was obligation wearing the costume of instinct, or something in modernity itself is actively producing conditions in which people do not want to continue. Both things may be simultaneously true. Some of what was called instinct was compulsion, and modernity, with its structural loneliness, its dissolution of community, its infinite choices and absent guarantees, its performance of identity across platforms designed to make you feel inadequate, its complete destruction of every village that once made raising children survivable, produces a form of exhaustion that makes the idea of creating another life feel not like a gift, but like a weight being added to a person already drowning. Peter Wessel-Zapfe wrote that the human being may have developed too much consciousness to live peacefully with its own existence. A species that can fully understand its own mortality, the inevitability of losing everything it loves, the indifference of the universe to its suffering, such a species has an inherently uncomfortable relationship with the act of creating more consciousness to carry the same weight. Previous generations had children and trusted the world would improve. The current generation looks at the world and wants to know, who told you that? Civilizations do not disappear only when cities burn. Some begin to end when they lose the intimate conviction to continue, not through violence, through a quiet, private, millions of individual decisions withdrawal from the future. And what makes this moment truly unprecedented is not the demographic numbers, it is the reason behind them. Every previous population decline in history had an external cause: war, disease, famine, collapse, something that arrived from outside and destroyed the conditions for life. This is different. This is happening in the most comfortable, most protected, most resource-rich conditions in human history. There is no external cause. There's only a growing number of people looking at existence with clear eyes and not being sure it is something they want to pass forward. That is not despair. It is not nihilism. It is something more philosophically significant and more difficult to respond to. It is a civilization attempting, for the first time, to examine its own premise. The automatic answers are failing. Push through. It's worth it. You'll regret not doing it. Life is a gift. These sentences are becoming harder to say with a straight face to a generation that watched what they produced. And the most important question, the one that sits underneath the economics, underneath the policy, underneath everything, has no answer that fits on a government initiative or a motivational poster. What does humanity actually think about its own condition? Not performed, not optimized, not managed into something presentable. What does it actually think at 3 a.m. in the silence, when the noise stops and the real thing surfaces? The birth rate may be the most honest answer that question has ever produced. Millions of people, in private, without coordination, across dozens of countries and cultures, arriving at the same hesitation. Not a rejection of life, something quieter and harder. A pause, a genuine, considered, morally serious pause at the edge of continuation. The most radical act in a world that demands your continuation is to stop and ask, for whose benefit? Civilizations have been destroyed by enemies, disease, and collapse. This one is the first to think its way to the edge, and that edge is where we are standing right now. In the silence that follows every honest conversation about what existence actually contains. In the space where certainty used to live before enough people had enough freedom and enough language to notice it was already gone.